I'm Emily Ferguson, the Phoebe Operations Manager and a certified coach here at the Institute for Zen Leadership.
And I'm Jenny Whitelaw, the co-developer of the Phoebe and also the founder of the Institute for Zen Leadership.
And today we will be your coaches.
Before we dive into your report, we want to give you a little background on the Phoebe. And we want to give you a chance to actually experience these energy patterns in yourself. We'll walk you through the pages of the Phoebe report and what it means, and then we'll close with how you might use it to develop a pattern you'd like easier access to.
Before we get started, take a moment to write down one strength, either something you see positive in yourself or that you've gotten feedback on, one weakness, maybe something that keeps getting in your way or you've heard complaints, and then one challenge that you would like the patterns to help you work through.
We'll refer back to these as we go through the report, that you can get the most out of your Phoebe report and put it into practice.
So what is Phoebe? Phoebe stands for Focus Energy Balance Indicator. The Phoebe measures 4 energy patterns. The energy patterns are a collection of your environment, your thoughts, your habits, the way you interact with other people, your communication styles. And when you take all of those factors together, they can be represented in 4 different ways. The Phoebe is the first personality assessment to link mind and body. As we'll see later on, all of the energy patterns have a focal point within the body that when you do certain things, you can physically feel yourself shifting into. The Phoebe is different from other personality assessments you may be aware of, in that the Phoebe doesn't assign you a type or say you are in this box. The Phoebe says, these are the energy patterns all people have access to. What's your preference? And how can you access the other ones when it's most helpful for you?
One of the things that makes Phoebe special is this link between mind and body, as Emily was saying. And there's something very special about how that helps us make shift possible in ourselves and in our lives. I mean, if I were to say to you, grab a hold of your next thought and turn that around, you would know what I'm asking, because we can't grab thought. It's not something we can hang on to. But if I were to say, fold your arms, you would notice from just the habits of your body, you've picked one arm to be on top. And if I said turn that around, well, you could do it. It might not be as comfortable, but you could do it. And likewise, if you were to practice this every day for a few weeks, it would get more comfortable. And that's the same spirit as these energy patterns. Some are going to feel more comfortable than others. And any that we practice, we get easier access to. Now, unlike folding your arms this way or that way, which we don't think has any particular significance, you'll see that each of these patterns are excellent at a different set of things. Now, where did they come from? This work grew out of physiology, not psychology. Back in the 1930s, Josephine Rathbone was watching how people moved, and she noticed that every one of our movements is coordinated by opposing muscle groups, sort of an engine and a brake. And that there are 4 ways that these 2 muscle groups can work together, depending on which fires first or second, or if they alternate or both at the same time. And out of that emerges 4 ways of moving. For a while, people just thought, oh, that's interesting, movement patterns. But it turns out these movement patterns are integrated with so many other things around emotions, thought processes, behaviors, and all that Emily had laid out earlier. When you change how you move, you change how you do things. You change how you lead. Turning to your report, let's give you an experience of each of the 4 patterns. And Emily will be good enough here to give some movements that you can move along with. So first, stand up, as she is doing, and let's feel what driver's like. As you feel each of these patterns, I encourage you to capture a few words that describe your state as you move into this pattern. So, Driver is going to start by opening a palm and smashing the other blade of the hand against it. Sharp cutting movements, very sharp. Or pointing motions, direct into the point. A punch into the air, capping that, sharp diagonal jabs of elbows. These kind of sharp movements put the body into driver. Or finally, if you press your fingers together and sight down your index fingers as if your life depended upon it, and notice what's happening with your vision. And if you were to go from here and move, notice the directness of the movement. So, Emily, tell us, as you move into driver, what's your experience? What is this thing good for?
This thing is good for getting things out of the way. Fast, direct, go, deadlines, goals, everything is done. I'm not feeling the need to interact with anyone, though.
It is an independent pattern, and in that sense, not such a good listener.
Not at all. I have my plan, this is what I'm doing. You're either on board or you're not.
So what's the risk of using it at the wrong time or too much of this pattern?
Using it at the wrong time can alienate people. You can become a bully. And if you use it for too long, you can actually experience physical burnout. Even now, I'm still feeling some of that residual tension in my body.
Pumped up. So I bet you're ready for the next pattern.
Oh yeah, let's go.
So let's enter the next pattern, which we call the organizer pattern. And for this organizer pattern, Emily will be standing up straight, as if she could have a book on her head. And she'll demark the sides of a box that she wouldn't want someone stepping inside of. That's her space. This is a pattern that knows about space, holding form, or 3 parts of a project plan. You know people who talk like this. If Emily gently touches her shoulders and just keeping the lower body still, tips the upper body side to side, there's a pivot point around the solar plexus that she's moving around, which is the physical center of organizer in your body. If she places her hands, not pressing, just placing her hands there, as you may do yourself, feel the upright composure of this pattern. And now to move in the pattern, if you step forward and draw up, and step back and draw in, to the left and draw up, to the right and draw in. And just follow Emily, keep repeating those movements and feel into your own state in this pattern. Feel into your thoughts, emotions, how you would do things in this pattern. Oh, Emily, you're doing that very well. What's your experience in this pattern?
I'm feeling very organized, to borrow a term. There's a lot of planning that went into all of that. There was a right place for everything. My feet, my body. In the office, everything's color coordinated, labeled. It's a very conscientious pattern. Everything is thought out step by step. Big projects are broken down step by step.
And what could be the risk of using it at the wrong time or overdoing organizer? What do you think?
Well, since organizer is a pattern of holding form, you notice my body was very straight up and down. Everything is exactly perfect. You run the risk of running into perfectionism. And as we know, perfectionism can also lead to anxieties and burnout and potentially taking too long to do something because everything must be exact.
Right. For our third pattern, we invite you to, shake out all that stillness. And we're going to start moving into a pattern of oscillation where we alternate. So if Emily is just standing with her feet maybe shoulder width and starts shifting left to right, and I encourage you to move along with her, and she can start using her arms into a figure 8 and feel the sloshiness of this pattern, a pattern like water, and just notice the physicality of it, how you would do things in it, the emotion of it, and how it differs from the earlier states. This is the pattern of Collaborator. What does this rhythmic moving pattern feel like?
It feels like riding a wave almost. There's that back and forth that we saw with the figure eight. Collaborators can see both sides of an argument or jump from project to project as their interests grow. Collaborators are really good at collaborating. They love engaging with other people and bringing people into their job or whatever it is that brings them joy. They're also really good at bringing joy to other people.
I noticed you keep smiling.
Yeah, it comes with the pattern.
Comes with the pattern. So what's the risk of this fun, playful, joyful pattern if we used it too much?
Well, we all know someone who's too fun or too playful. The biggest concern is you might not be taken seriously if you spend too much time doing this.
The fourth pattern, the visionary. And for this one, we'll contrast it with the focused driver. If you started by pressing your fingers together with that focused, single directional gaze, now let that go. Let your hands drift to the side of the head where you're using only peripheral view to see both hands at once. And now as the hands just drift down, supported by air. This is a pattern of air. And if you gently feel your arms lifting up, you're not even sure who's lifting them. And then extending through the fingertips. A sense of extension, hanging, drifting feeling. And then down. And as they come up again, a thumb and index finger come together and start crafting the flight of a kite or a bee. You might have a sense of extension out through the arm, out through the body. Everything opening and expanding. Feel into this non-repeating movement and what this visionary feels like in you. Tell us about visionary. How did that feel?
Visionary, as we saw, is about bigness and openness. It's very expansive. Visionaries are looking towards the future or next month, next year. They're all about that big thought, that big think. There's a lot of creativity and imagination that comes with visionary.
And what's the risk of using it at the wrong time?
If you spend all of your time with all of these big, beautiful ideas, they'll stay big, beautiful ideas. You need something, one of the other patterns, to bring that back down and help that work get done. If they stay up here, there's no legs to it.
Excellent.
Now that you've had a chance to experience all four patterns, you can see that they can work together in one system. The visionary's ideas can be combined with the collaborator's engagement to bring people in, and then the organizer's plan to get that idea out into the world, and the driver's determination to bring it to the world. So now let's turn to your report. So let's turn to page 5 in your report. This graph on the top of page 5 came from the first 120 questions that you answered as a part of the assessment. If you gave yourself a lot of very high numbers on the scale from 1 to 7, you will likely have a lot of very long bars. If you gave yourself a lot of lower numbers or lower scores, you'll have very low bars. This graph was normed, so 100 points is considered average. Numbers in the very high are about the 10% of the population, the top 10, and then numbers in the very low are considered the bottom 10% of the population. Numbers that are about 8 points different are considered statistically significant and likely to be stable. The report itself will identify your longest bar, so the one you gave the most points to, as your home pattern. If it is 8 points different from the second longest bar, it is very likely to be your home pattern. On pages 6 through 9, there is a description of the individual patterns. This larger section here talks about what very low through very high means for that particular pattern. And then if you look at this bar here on the side, that talks about your specific score.
It's good to know your home pattern because we access the other 3 patterns through it. In other words, even as we access the other 3, the home pattern's sort of playing along in the background in our physical body as well as in our thoughts and emotions. So what that means is that when we combine our home pattern with, say, our second pattern, we get a characteristic style that we see ourselves using most of the time. It's called a primary style on page 10 in your report. And if you see yourself using your third or fourth patterns, at least at the moderate level, we'd say you have access to some backup styles, some ways to access those weaker patterns when they're needed. Now, if they're in the low or very low range, we'd say, no, you don't see yourself using that pattern enough that it would be part of a readily accessible style. That's what style means in the Phoebe report. Turning to the work behaviors page in the report, this is a completely independent part of the Phoebe report. Here you were asked, what do you actually do? And you couldn't give yourself all high scores or all low scores. You had to choose, much as you're having to choose right now what pattern to be in. You saw a list of behaviors and you gave yourselves 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, or 1s, and then this part of the report just organizes those behaviors in terms of what you see yourself doing most to least. We color code them by the pattern that does them best. And it can be instructive to sort of cover the bottom half of the report and see what colors dominate in the top half. That's another read on your style in practice. Conversely, you can cover the top half and see what patterns fall to the bottom. That's another way to look at patterns or even a style that you might want to cultivate a little more. When you look back to your strengths, your weaknesses, your challenges, you probably see some connections between these colors, these styles, and what you see yourself as good or weak at. This can be a very useful part of the report to compare to page 5. Oftentimes it'll agree. You'll see the same colors show up on top, or as the longest bars. And sometimes it doesn't agree and can raise some interesting questions. And I invite you to reflect on that if that's the case for you. When you look at the behaviors at the top, if they're coming out of a pattern that's not one of your favorites, you might ask, do I really access that energy when I do those things? Or if you see some behaviors right at the bottom that, boy, could be so helpful in how you address that challenge that you mentioned, you might think about, oh, what pattern I could access in order to help me with that challenge. That's how this page can be so helpful to you in getting more out of the Phoebe report.
The rest of this report and the video will talk about developing the patterns. In your specific report, starting around page 13, it will either call out your 4th pattern or any pattern that you scored as low as a risk area. This will talk about different ways that you can develop that particular pattern. There are some bullets here that talk about symptoms of underusing a pattern as opposed to overusing, which we've talked about. If these aren't necessarily what's happening for you, consider ways that it might be showing up in your life. So as we continue on, consider your strength, weakness, and challenge that you identified in the beginning of this call. Think about which pattern might be most useful in strengthening that weakness or helping you move past that challenge.
So how can we develop driver or any of the patterns? We'll see that one of the principles of a good practice is to engage the pattern you want to develop using some of your strengths. So how you access driver might be a little different. But you'll see in the development table some suggestions for things you can do every day, as well as some physical and sensory cues for developing driver energy.
So some work behaviors you can do every day. Ultimately find the one that's most comfortable and most natural for you. But some suggestions. Get to the point. Know your top priorities. Prepare for meetings in a very driver way. Go in with what you want to do, who you want to talk to.
Yeah, what's my point in this meeting?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Get right to that point.
Exactly.
We also have a sense and driver of winning and competing, and oftentimes things that keep score. Even keeping score on your self-accessing driver can be a way to be more effective at it. Physically in the body, as you saw Emily doing earlier, it's a hard and fast pattern. And you often see these kind of movements in the martial arts, in fast competitive sports, in racing toward a finish line. Those kind of physical activities that are done hard and fast tend to bring out driver energy. You even hear my voice picking up, talking in driver. In terms of things you could even do for sensory stimulation in driver, driver centers on pushing and on clarity, and having even music that has a kind of pushing, drumming beat to it would tend to bring out driver intensity. In an office space, having few distractions, stark, high contrast colors, black, white, maybe red, having a clear desk except for the one thing you're going to focus on. Those would be characteristics that stimulate the senses with driver kind of clarity. So how would we develop organizer energy? Some very clear work behaviors that bring out this sort of conscientious, do the right thing kind of pattern would start with organizing your day, making a list, breaking something down into steps, being able to make time for planning. You'll see in the list of organizer behaviors a number of things that help you think about preparing for something ahead of time, doing things with a list.
So what about some physical ways? You can start with the energizers that we did earlier in the call, or think about movements that ask you to hold that form. So maybe yoga or meditation, or sitting up very straight in your chair.
Like you are right now.
Exactly. And then organizer offices are very neat and precise. Everything is labeled and color-coded. There's a place for everything, and everything is perfectly in its place. And then organizer music, for example, might be classical, something that organizes your thoughts, or marching music where you place on the beat.
Right. Whenever you have that feeling in music of placing, stepping on the beat, you've got a quality of organizer energy that can be very useful for, even with kids, learning arithmetic, and for adults, organizing our thoughts.
So let's talk about ways to develop the collaborator. Collaborators, as we talked about, bring out the fun, and they can jump from idea to idea or maybe project to project, but they're also really good at working together with people. Anytime you're engaging with someone and you feel that warmth and that connection, you're accessing Collaborator. So some different things you can do. You can celebrate your wins, celebrate your losses. Find ways to get your friends or your coworkers together. Maybe weekend parties or going out for drinks after work. And also consider ways that you can see both sides of an argument. That natural flow is very Collaborator.
I find even as you're talking, I want to go back and forth and back and forth. We don't want to make you dizzy. But some physical things that bring this pattern that centers on this swing or this alternating movement. Physical things that give us this, this kind of energy would be things that have that kind of rhythm to it. So of course a lot of dance has this quality. Things that move from this lower center, this around a couple inches below the belly button is where this pattern is physically centered. So things that move that center. Aikido as a martial art is a very collaborative martial art. Also things that are moving in water, for example, or even bicycling that is done sort of slow and easy, that brings out that sort of sloshiness, can bring out the collaborator energy. And of course, team activities and activities that engage other people, team sports or bowling, or things that help us have a social time together will bring out this joy. In an office space, you often see These are warm places where people want to gather. As Emily said, there's a warmth to this pattern. So having fun game kind of places in a workplace where people want to hang out and talk to each other, sometimes bright colors and soft fabrics and things that like bean bags or whatever, balloons, family photos, those are the kind of things you see in collaborator workspaces. And music-wise, Collaborator knows how to swing. It has that swinging beat. You want to swing on the beat. It's the roll of rock and roll. If Driver's the rock, and Collaborator's the roll. So how might we approach the visionary's bigness in development? Well, as some work behaviors we could try, it would be opening things up, stirring things up, being able to brainstorm or pull together some of the unusual suspects at work to get ideas that you wouldn't normally hear. It would be to widen the net and be able to take in points of view you wouldn't normally see. It can also be getting out of the office and out into nature, or taking a team to an unusual place to get inspired by an aquarium or an art museum, or by nature itself in solving a challenge.
And then some physical ways that you can tap into visionary, like Ginny was saying, things that are open and that expansion. Tai Chi is a good one. Or if you're interested in meditation, more of the energetic opening and that sense of connection can really bring out that visionary.
Music-wise, in visionary, we're kind of into the new age music space. What would you say about new age music?
New age music is that music that when you hear it, you either want to meditate or hold everyone in the room, is for me.
It has that bigness.
It's got that very bigness.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
It just opens you up.
It does.
And workspaces that have that visionary quality.
They have stacks of reading materials for quick inspiration. And they have the natural lighting, big open spaces, maybe very high ceilings, lots of windows, plants to bring that nature feel inside. So there you have it. We've now talked about where the report came from, what your report says, and different ways to develop each pattern. So going forward, play around with the patterns. See if you start noticing them in yourself and in others, and which situation calls for which pattern. Ideally, as we talked about, the practice is picking one pattern at a time to develop, one way to strengthen that pattern, either through the work behaviors or the offices, and then one token or symbol that can remind you of that commitment you made to yourself. And then for more information about all of the patterns, the energizers that were included in this email, you can go to FEBIassessment.com. There we have our blog and different ways to contact different coaches. We also have Move to Greatness, written by Dr. Ginny Whitelaw and Betsy Wetzig. This is your how-to, everything that has to do with the energy patterns. Thank you.